Thank you, Mr. Cheung.
Thank you very much for inviting me to your interview.
We would like to ask you, first of all, what do you think about accessibility and healthy living in Hong Kong? What is the relationship?
I think it's increasingly important that we understand the interface between the two issues, particularly given the fact that our population is aging and aging at a very rapid pace. It's worth remembering that 1 out of 7 Hong Kong people now in Hong Kong aged 65 and above. We're talking about 1.1 million people out of 7.3 million people now. The figure will skyrocket to 2.56 million by the year 2041. In that 25 years' time, we are talking about 1 in 3 by then will be senior citizens in the community. So it underlines the importance of, first of all, a healthy community and also accessibility, particularly for the senior citizens.
Given the current situation and the challenges of Hong Kong, where we have a lot of congested pathway, very hilly terrain, the roads are never leveled, how can we, in terms of equal access and active aging, how can we try our best to provide something better in terms of building environment to improve those issues on accessibility?
This is really a challenge that we have to embrace, a challenge we have to overcome, and a challenge we have to really tackle head on. Hong Kong's topography, our geography, as you rightly say, is not conducive to accessibility by the disabled and also by the elderly, frail elderly in particular. That's why we have to do two things. First of all, a community mindset change is required, which means that architects, designers, everybody involved, stakeholders, when they start designing facilities for access, they have to bear in mind the rapidly aging population that we are facing. First of all, the users increasingly will be so-called disadvantaged group, needy groups. Secondly, in fact, I think we need to, other than this mindset change, we also make sure that the government, in terms of legislation, also regulate the building environment, make sure that the built environment is accessible within reasonable limit.
Okay, when you talk about users, nowadays everyone is looking at the issue of elderly. Okay, in terms of housing environment for the elderly, we often come across problems about when they get old, they live in the same house, but at a certain day they cannot go home or get out on a wheelchair, or when they come home their wheelchairs cannot push them back into the bathroom. So a lot of those issues has just coming up, and we believe the issue will be getting more worse in the coming years, as you just mentioned before. In terms of welfare consideration, would the government even consider to expand something like helping the elderly to improve the interior of the housing?
A very good question. In fact, our policy for elderly care essentially have two limbs, two legs. First of all, the core is aging in place is the core. Aging in place simply means aging in community at home. And the other leg, which is really ancillary, subsidiary, parallel to it, it's institutional care as the backup. So we are talking about, as you rightly say, the core is for the elderly to really spend their golden years at home in the community. That's why our major focus now, in fact, this current administration, our major focus is on enhancing community support, community care, care support as well, carer support as well. In other words, make sure that the elderly can really spend their golden years in the community and at home. And this also requires, for example, substantial uplifting in the standard and quantity and quality of, for example, home care services, of daycare services, for example, more daycare centers, so that they can spend the daytime there and go home in the evening. And at the same time, of course, to and fro is the question of commuting, transportation, wheelchair movement and all that. So all these have to come into play. That's why our focus from now on, in fact, more emphasis will be on community care, home care, and also we provided a carer allowance for some low-income carer as well as a pilot scheme, because they do have a role to play in looking after the elderly, giving up a job, for example, And that's why it's all part and parcel of the whole picture of building a caring, compassionate, and age-friendly community.
Yes, I understand that recently the government, especially your bureau, has proposed something very innovative, the $2 scheme for them to travel on all sorts of transportation that gives them a chance to go around and get connected. And also, I think the government's also provide a lot of funding to upgrade the social centers for the elderly and neighborhood elderly centers. But when we talk about aging in place, we really want to see that some elderly, if they can get some support from the government. At the moment, the housing authority is providing those support, but for those in a private residence, whether a support will be available to them, such as now they will be given a subsidy to renovate the building as a whole, right? The elderly, if they are owners of the building. At the same time, the common area will be refurbished to the way that they can get wheelchairs in and wheelchair out. But what about the inside of their home? Are they going to spend their own money to renovate the inside of the home, or would the welfare sector or the government welfare sector consider to go as far as to inside their home to help them to do some renovation?
We did have a scheme a few years ago of improving the living environment of elderly. And in fact, the scheme proved to be very popular. And we don't rule out the possibility of, for example, repeating this sort of scheme in future if resources are available. But coming back to your question about the $2 scheme and all that, I think let me explain a little bit. It's a very important strategic decision in terms of promoting active aging. We are talking about, you look at the so-called the phase in the staging of an elderly life, so-called golden years. I think what we should do is actually to make sure that the elderly remains active, mobile, keep them mobile and active as long as possible before they really become frail. In other words, independent, integration in the community, fusing in the community, socially mobile. And that's why this $2 public transport concessionary fare scheme proved to be a hit, very successful. In fact, every day, the current figure is very encouraging. We're talking about attracting 770,000 passenger trips per day of elderly users. You can imagine, we're talking about 400,000 people easily, because without passenger trips to and back, well over 300,000 senior citizens move around, and also broaden their social circles, visiting friends, visiting relatives, grandchildren, and so on. In the process, we're talking about promoting social harmony and also dignity as well, and also community involvement. And they can also do volunteer work. And for those not so old, we call it young old, they can still go back to work in the labor market, part-time jobs as well, because of these heavily subsidized transportation costs. So all these are very important. And also, we've had elderly academy scheme, encouraging the elderly continuing education, lifelong education, and also in the process cross-generation harmony, because they mix with students in schools, universities, going to college and all that. So all these have a very important positive impact on the whole picture of elderly care and also an age-friendly community.
Okay, so overall, as a way forward, when we look at the issue of accessibility for the disabled people and elderly, the Hong Kong government put the emphasis on the elderly with the current situation of the aging population. Any particular direction or any particular drive that you think the government can push this further to get everyone, particularly the people that design and build this environment, build these buildings, whether it's residential buildings or shopping mall, whether there's a way that they can pay more attention to the issue and therefore delivering a better built environment?
Yes, as I said, with Hong Kong fast aging, I think we need to really move ahead and think ahead, plan ahead. So stakeholders involved, whether it's architect, designer, builders, whatever, they have to bear in mind the needs of the end users at the end of the day. It's very important. And also the second thing to bear in mind is this culture change, mindset change, access, not just physical access, really talking about personal touch, contacting them, make them to feel that they're being looked after. They show concern to the elderly. This is another way of access. So barrier-free access, not just physical access. We talk about emotional access as well. Okay, person-to-person access. The other thing is, I think Hong Kong being what it is, we need to approach also on a district basis. District needs vary from one to another. I'm very glad to say that 3 districts in Hong Kong have recently gained the accreditation from the World Health Organization, the title of age-friendly communities. Sai Kung, Cheung, and Cheung, 3 of them. We got 18 districts. I'm very glad that these 3 districts have been built, have been described, have won the recognition of WHO, age-friendly communities. I think it's very encouraging. I hope the other 15 districts will follow suit as quickly as possible so that we can create an atmosphere conducive to building an age-friendly community in Hong Kong throughout the whole territory.